This episode is brought to you by The Fifth Vital Sign. Master your cycles and optimize your fertility. With over 1,000 research citations, it is the most comprehensive resource on fertility awareness and the menstrual cycle to date. The Fifth Vital Sign is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats on Amazon.com. Listen to The Fifth Vital Sign for free when you sign up for a 30-day trial with Audible. Visit fertilityfriday.com/audible for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/audible. This episode is brought to you by my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program. Learn fertility awareness from the comfort of your own home at your own pace for a fraction of the cost. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/mastery for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/mastery. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 280. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. I've got a great episode for you today. In today's episode, I'm sharing my interview with Dr. Anna Cabeca, and we talk about a number of important factors that relate to women's health. We get into stress and how stress can negatively impact the cycle and ovulation. We talk about ketogenic diets and dive into some of the quote unquote controversy, as there's a lot of different opinions as to eat and how to do it and what is an appropriate level of carbohydrate intake and how could that affect the cycle. So we really get into that today. And it's an important conversation to have. For me, the great equalizer, as I always say, is the menstrual cycle. And so for those of you who've listened to the podcast for quite a while, you'll know that I don't promote a specific type of diet. I'm not following a trend and saying this is exactly the way every single person should eat. What I'm always focusing on is what to incorporate to support optimal hormonal health and what to incorporate to ensure that your cycles, your fertility, your overall health are all aligned. Because ultimately, the answer to the question of what should I eat and what would be best for me is right there in your menstrual cycle. Often the menstrual cycle is the first indicator if you're not getting enough of something or if you're getting too much of something else. So yes, I know that you'll appreciate our conversation today and how we address the ketogenic approach for different stages of your reproductive life. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. And I'm excited to be here today with Dr. Anna Cabeca. Dr. Anna promotes her unique keto green diet and lifestyle as a safe and natural approach to relieving the 9 worst menopause symptoms: brain fog, bladder problems, fatigue, weight gain, loss of intimacy, hormonal imbalance, vaginal dryness, and sleep disturbances. Board certified in gynecology, integrative, and anti-aging medicine, she's designed a novel system for beating back the menopause blues and feeling youthful again. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Dr. Anna.
Thank you, Lisa. Great to be here with you.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show, and thank you for sending me a copy of your latest book, The Hormone Fix, and congratulations. It seems to be doing very well and obviously making a big difference in just the conversation around menopause.
Yes, thank you.
So before we jump into the topics of the day, today we're going to be talking about some of the things that we can do to prepare ourselves for a healthy menopause. But I would love to get a sense from you of what drove you to focus on this topic and what brought you to write the book, The Hormone Fix.
Well, it's definitely part of my personal experience interwoven with professional experience. But at age 38, I was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure or premature ovarian insufficiency, or an early menopause, essentially, and told I was irreversibly infertile, that I would never be able to have another child. And my husband and I at the time desperately wanted to try to have another child. And so it was devastation upon devastation at this time in my life to be told, to be an expert in hormones, to be an expert, gynecologist and obstetrician, and then to be facing this type of diagnosis or essentially sentence was heartbreaking. And that took me on a journey, Lisa, literally around the world. I left my practice for a year and we traveled with my kids and I learned from healers all over the world. And I also experienced the body's tremendous ability to heal itself. And I will say, with God's guidance, met some amazing people. And as a result of the things I've learned, the herbs and herbal medicines and traditional wisdom that I incorporated, as well as a great deal of faith, I became pregnant at age 41 and delivered Ava Marie, who is now 11. So I'm 53 this year with an 11-year-old. So was able to reverse menopause. And we don't ever really talk about that in gynecology. A diagnosis of ovarian insufficiency or ovarian failure is led with, well, your chances are like 1 in 10,000. At your age, probably unlikely, really unlikely. Like your only chance is egg donation is what I was told. And so to have that experience, to reverse my menopause, to conceive a healthy, thank you God, a healthy baby. And that that was inspiring. I integrated more functional medicine into my practice, holistic medicine into my practice. I created a product called Mighty Maca Plus, which was a combination of ingredients from my journey around the world that I used to help me, I believe, restore my fertility and help balance my hormones, as well as detoxify some toxins. And that condition, this state went pretty well till I hit a second menopause at age 48. And that's where I experienced where so many women experience the weight gain, 5, 10, 20 pounds without doing anything different. Not to mention the brain fog, the fatigue, the irritability, just not feeling yourself, being exhausted, having difficulty making it through the day. Those are things that I experienced again. And that's where I, okay, what am I missing here? And that's where I developed and came up with my Keto Green Way, the combination of an alkalinizing plant-based diet with healthy ketogenic foods and practices and principles that together help restore the body, mind, and spirit. And so in my book, The Hormone Fix, I include a 10-day quick start keto green detox plan, as well as there's chapters on toxins, chapters on testing, chapters on vaginal health, reproductive health. So really, and stress and the effect that stress has on our bodies and our relationships. And from my journey around the world and my life experience, personal experience, as well as now helping tens of thousands of others, this book was born to really empower other women, men, families to be the leader in their health and to have hope and to find a better, healthier tomorrow.
Well, and one of the things so when I was listening to your story, first of all, thank you for sharing your experience. I can't believe, I can't imagine how devastating it would be at age 38 to basically be told that that's it, you're going through menopause. So one of the questions that came to mind, with my background and with the podcast over the years, my listeners are very familiar with the concept that the menstrual cycle is like a vital sign. And if you experience certain issues or changes that happen to your menstrual cycle, one way to look at it would be that it's a sign. Your body is telling you that something needs to change, that something's going on, that something's wrong. Whereas Western medicine will often look at those signs and say, you have ovarian insufficiency and you won't ever be able to conceive again. You know what I'm saying? So you can have similar symptoms, but there's different paradigms and different ways of looking at it. So in your experience, you mentioned that you were able to reverse this. Looking back at that experience, do you feel that the diagnosis was accurate? Or do you feel like in many ways it was like a sign that you had to make some changes in order to be your healthiest self?
Everything pointed to it. So elevated LH, elevated FSH. I failed the highest doses of injectable fertility medications, and with no ovarian response, no to minimal ovarian response, nothing worth hoping for. And so I went through several cycles of fertility treatments. There was nothing. And I've been in the field of fertility medicine for 15 years. How many years? Oh my gosh, over close to 15 years at that point.
In terms of what actually brought you back to, well, actually I have a question for you, because I think some of my listeners would want to know, were you ovulating and menstruating, or had that stopped altogether?
That had stopped.
Okay. So you had been cycling and then you just stopped.
Yeah.
Okay. And then all the medications and the drugs and the procedures weren't making it happen.
Right. So in 2006, we experienced a tragic life-altering accident where my son, who was 18 months old, passed away and instantly. And so I went from breastfeeding him that day to not having another period for quite a long time, other than medically induced cycles.
Well, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's
so in my book, thank you. In my book, I write about the effects of stress on our body. So even attending with the information that I know from medical practice, certainly we know stress can affect us. However, to put us into menopause, my reproductive endocrinologist, did not ever suggest the connection, but to go completely to have those physical signs and symptoms, to go from breastfeeding to never having another drop of milk. And any woman who's listening who has breastfed knows that if you miss a feeding by 10 minutes, your breasts are engorged. So the effect was so profound, physically, emotionally, mentally. And life stresses. In my book, I talk a lot about this. And grief isn't something we can compare ones to another. And I really want everyone listening to honor that, because we have to honor our own experience. A miscarriage, we can grieve tremendously a miscarriage, and that will be on our mind possibly for the rest of our life. And that's okay. The thing is, I want women to be empowered with the amazing ability to restore and heal, and how critically important that is, because when we undergo this stress, post-traumatic stress, a tragic loss, other grief, accident, traumatic event in our life, that the physiologic effects can last quite a long time. And this is where I write about the cortisol and oxytocin connection and disconnect. And I see it a lot in clients who are undergoing fertility because of the traumatic stress and strain of fertility treatment, certainly hormonally. Secondly, scheduling intercourse and being in close relationship with a third party as a physician, knowing when my patients were ovulating, telling them when to have sex, and then again, and coming in for inseminations. All of that is, certainly difficult. And not to mention when your period comes or doesn't come, but the pregnancy test is negative. Mm-hmm. So that trauma can also resurface in the perimenopause and menopause. When we've had trauma in our lives and we hit the period of neurologic vulnerability, I call it neuroendocrine vulnerability. Now, this is what I'm calling it. And this is my area of current research, and that will be further developed in my next book to a degree. But when we're 35 to 55, we enter this period of neuroendocrine vulnerability. And what happens is that as progesterone sharply declines from decrease in ovulation and ovulatory function, progesterone is a neuroprotective hormone. So what we see as a physician and what we see in patients is PMS, irritability, mood swings. And I always tell my clients, well, if you only hate your husband 2 weeks out of the month, it's your hormones, not your husband, right? But it can feel like that. And, difficulty sleeping, brain fog, feeling like you've lost your edge, loss of sex drive, libido, interest, all of those things can shift. And there's a physiology behind it. So it's not in our head. It's not something we can think about, think away, but certainly part of it, we have to heal the underlying physiology. So this period of neuroendocrine vulnerability is also coincident with the brain's, well, let's say this way, progesterone and estrogen decline, and they're both neuroprotective hormones. So it is known that estrogen facilitates the use of glucose or gluconeogenesis in the brain, and we use glucose predominantly as a brain fuel. However, when we are losing progesterone and estrogen, we know that this ability for the brain to have readily available fuel, glucose, declines steeply, and coincident with that are the increasing symptoms of anxiety, mood swings, irritability, hot flashes, difficulty sleeping, you name it.
And so just to clarify for my audience, are you talking about just like the perimenopause period? So the gradual decline, like the 10 years before you hit menopause, or are you talking about in general?
During this period of hormonal decline.
And is it due to just for instance, like my audience members who are really familiar with the menstrual cycle. So of course we produce our estrogen in the pre-ovulatory phase, and then we produce our progesterone in the post-ovulatory phase. So are you talking more about the kind of the period of time where you ovulate fewer times, as you get closer to menopause, or just in general that your hormone production, even though you are ovulating, is lower than it would have been earlier?
Exactly. Yes. So when we're ovulating, because we're not recruiting as many follicles, maybe we're not having adequate corpus luteum or progesterone's lower in the second phase. So when we see that too, that's when we're seeing a lot of this early PMS symptoms exacerbated. And so this is where we're kind of teasing out, estrogen deficiency, progesterone deficiency, or decline, just in general decline, what effect that's having on our brain. Mood, memory. Mm-hmm.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the connection between stress and even progesterone and the cycle, because for a lot of women, when they start charting their menstrual cycles and that's for many women, it's the first time that they actually see how specific of an impact that stress can have on the cycle. When you described the tragedy that you experienced and also your experience of having your milk completely stop and also your period completely stop for an indeterminate period of time, immediately my response in my mind was kind of like, well, yes. And that wouldn't surprise me, but that's because I work in this field and I see the charts. So for many women, it's not that severe, obviously, but they may find that when they do something stressful or have a really stressful event, that their ovulation will be delayed or that their second half of the cycle will be shortened. So especially when you're talking about the impacts of low progesterone as we reach menopause, it can't be understated how much stress can play a role in that.
Absolutely, yes. And so as we're under stress, any lifestyle stress, chronic everyday stress, a traumatic stress or perceived stress, we are going to elicit a release of cortisol, one of our life-protecting, life-saving hormones. So we hear a lot, cortisol's got two sides to it. It's got a really good side, got a really bad side. When it hangs around too long, it can really eat away at us, so to speak. But it is designed to protect us, to help us recover, to provide some resilience. And when we are under this chronic everyday stress or post-traumatic stress and it's long-term, what happens is, we get a feedback mechanism from the paraventricular nucleus to shut down the production of cortisol eventually. So then you get into a low cortisol state. So with this high cortisol state, we've got to make it. So where do we make it from? Ultimately, on the top is progesterone. So from progesterone comes cortisol and our other reproductive hormones. So if we are pushing everything to cortisol, we are utilizing, so we're emptying the bucket of progesterone, but if all that is running downstream to cortisol, further downstream is DHEA, estrogen, and testosterone, our reproductive hormones. So then they're depleted. So in times of stress, life-saving hormone cortisol is here to rescue us. There's no time or resources to reproduce. All right. Now that's an extreme case, but that's definitely physiologic, nothing we can do about that. So what we have to do is to moderate the production of cortisol, reset it, get it into back a cyclic rhythm, and empower oxytocin, the hormone of connection. So when cortisol's up, oxytocin's down. So for those of you who are listening and you're like, man, I remember that really high stressful time or going through fertility and I just felt disconnected from my husband, or I left my job, or I no longer did things that I enjoyed to do. That's because cortisol was winning and oxytocin was losing. Oxytocin is the hormone of love, bonding, and connection. It's a hormone of fertility. It's a hormone of orgasm, of pleasure, of laughter, of when we breastfeed and when we deliver a baby, we are pumping out a tremendous amount of oxytocin, hence the bonding, the imprinting of that child to us. So that's oxytocin and the oxytocin cortisol connection. So think of it this way: cortisol goes up, oxytocin goes down. And if you're under the stress for a long period of time, the brain's like, hey, don't fry me out. Stop producing so much cortisol, right? Because we're going to fry ourselves out. Cortisol goes down, oxytocin comes down, and then we have this experience of burnout, this more isolation, depression, disconnection, no longer love or feeling love. And that's very dangerous place to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really important, I really like how you've made these connections, and I like how you talk about it as well. And I think it's really important. Not everybody knows that we make cortisol from progesterone. Mm-hmm. And especially for women who are trying to conceive, or women who are in the know about their menstrual cycle and the main hormones and how it works. Often the main topic is, how do I increase progesterone levels? I have low progesterone. I have a short luteal phase. There's a growing awareness of how important progesterone is for women in the menstrual cycle. And I think it makes it more tangible, because we often hear things like, well, just reduce your stress. And it's very kind of blasé, but to know that it's directly related to your hormones, of course, is essential.
I just think I would want to emphasize this point, not to interrupt, but when you said, just reduce your stress, right? Does not sound so simple.
Yeah,
just
right.
Stress. Yeah, just think yourself better, right? But it's really the underlying physiology that's going on that has to be corrected. So it's a multifactorial approach to managing our hormonal balance. And that's key. That is really, really important to understand. And it comes from many little things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to ask you one question. So I wanted to go back to your story for a minute, because I'm curious. I'm sure some of the audience members are curious. You mentioned that you had a baby when you were 41. So you reversed this process for yourself. You basically weren't ovulating. So my question is, were you able to ovulate on your own because of your efforts and conceive, or was it a combination of your efforts and artificial reproductive technology?
Yeah, completely on my own. We'd given up on reproductive intervention the year prior. So it was completely just through healing body, mind, and spirit. So it all had to come together, and never really giving up hope. I mean, I could say I pretty much gave up, threw in the towel, because you can't, how many periods can come by, or how many months can come by when you're trying and nothing happens? And it's really traumatic, especially in that state of hormonal imbalance, not knowing if you're not ovulating. So not knowing what's going on despite trying. So we'd stopped trying, stopped intervention. I used natural things to help my body, help my mind. So that's part of my journey, learning in Peru about maca, learning about and other antioxidants, mangosteen, acerola, looking at, the greens, the power of greens and antioxidants, and, combining those into a formula that helped me for sure, an adaptogenic combination of ingredients that really helped me. That was most likely part of it, combination of things, right? And then after breastfeeding Ava, periods resumed for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. So you were able to bring your periods back, but it sounds like it was a combination of all the different changes that you made, as well as addressing the emotional side of it. So then for women who are listening, because I know that there are women who are listening who have received similar diagnoses or have received kind of bits and pieces of information. Okay, you have high FSH. Okay, you have like follicle stimulating hormone for the listeners who may not be familiar with all the acronyms, or you have, your AMH is too low, and those types of things where they're being given all of this information and basically being told that they're going into menopause early. I feel like that's what the underlying factor is, or they may be just told outright. But essentially the message is your ovaries are failing, you're getting too old, you don't have any, eggs. Like this is kind of the messages that we're taught. So for women who are in that situation, obviously you wrote the book for women in general, but for women who are going through similar experiences. So where does she start?
Yeah, well, it first starts with never giving up hope. And in order for everyone else to be well, you have to be well. So often we find ourselves, trying to fix the kids, fix the husband, fix the job, fix the work, fix the to-do list. We find ourselves doing a lot. Self-care is really, really important for fertility. And that's, mind, body, and spirit care, right? So it, from my book, it starts with gratitude or appreciation first thing in the morning. And managing, that's part of managing cortisol. It starts with starting the day off with a green drink. For me, it's my Mighty Maca Plus with a shot of apple cider vinegar and a glass of alkaline water before I ever think about a cup of coffee. And for me, it's intermittent fasting with the Keto Green Way. So when I break fast after somewhere between 14 to 16 hours now, it's healthy fats, healthy protein, healthy lots of greens and fiber, very low carbohydrate, and keeping it as close to 0 grams of sugar as I can. And that's, breaking fast the Keto Green Way. And what happens with this methodology is we become more insulin sensitive. We help to establish a rhythm and a pattern that satisfies our circadian rhythm and our circadian pattern. And so that helps to manage cortisol. And as we give our body the nutrients and self-care it needs, because it's not just about what we eat, it's about the lifestyle that we keep as well. And that's like knowing when to say no and knowing when to say yes. But ultimately, never give up hope. And always, and this has helped so many of my infertile, quote unquote, clients have babies. Because now I've retired my clinical practice, so I do everything through my online space and my book now. But certainly in practice, how did I, help women restore their fertility? And it's definitely in this way, becoming more insulin sensitive, balancing, resetting our circadian rhythm, detoxing, right? So get that alkaline urinary pH. I talk about this in the book in the first few chapters. But get that alkaline urinary pH and get your body into balance. And it's amazing. And even in my perimenopause and menopausal online programs, that women will say my periods are starting again. And that's, maybe after over a year without a period. So that's really exciting that we can resume a healthy, periods indicate healthy hormones for the most part. So we want to maintain that by our body's capacity to do that as long as possible.
Well, and you were talking a little bit about just how having a hormonal imbalance, so having levels of estrogen and progesterone that are too low, are associated with these negative impacts, things that we always hear about menopause, hot flashes, irritability, vaginal dryness, et cetera. Basically, when you understand how I'm trying to think of how to word this, but there's different ways of understanding the same symptoms. I feel like I did an interview with Mary Wong a long time ago, and she was talking about the nocebo effect is what she called it. But when your practitioner tells you, okay, you're infertile, you're never going to have babies, the negative effect that can have, because we often talk about the placebo effect when you're told, you're given sugar pills and you're told that something's going to happen. And so I feel like one thing that is coming to me with our conversation is just we kind of have to be cautious about what we're told by our practitioners. Not that we need to disregard what we're told, but when you're told something like, you're never going to ovulate again, you're never going to have, those types of really detrimental diagnoses, that's one way to look at it. Like it's irreversible and it's never going to change, but you can also look at it as a symptom of an underlying issue, which is kind of how you looked at it in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And never give up hope because, I believe in miracles. So, and I've seen them. So, women who have been sentenced with one diagnosis or another diagnosis and completely reverse those diagnoses. So, and that includes with fertility issues in this tender area. We don't know. And the body has an amazing capacity to heal. So it is a symptom of getting to the underlying issue that's causing this result. And that's critical, Lisa, like you say. I mean, that is critical to understand that and be cautioned. I always say protect what I tell my kids this all the time, protect your eyes from what you see, protect your ears from what you hear, right? And that's important for us too. Like, don't take it into your heart. But like, if you've been facing this for a long time, say, what do I need to do to heal my body in the healthiest way possible so that I'm in my sexy feminine space and I've managed my hormones to the best, capacities, and they're serving me well. And in that, I mean, you're healthy, you don't ache, you're not worried about hair loss, not worried about, weight gain, you're at a happy weight, you're enjoying life, you're experiencing joy. Because ultimately, that's what we reflect on, that we're so glad we've experienced.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you talked a little bit about diet, and you mentioned a few things that we should touch on. So you mentioned intermittent fasting, you mentioned keto and getting into like a ketogenic state, and also just a diet on the lower carb side. We were talking a little bit in the pre-chat. We are living in a very interesting time, and there are widely different recommendations women are hearing and different interpretations, I would say, of kind of the different dietary choices and certain things like that. So there are many, you could call them influencers in the health space, or many health practitioners, or however you want to word it. Some for whom are big proponents of lower carb diet, some for whom are very opposed to that type of thing. And I feel like it's just good to kind of hash it out and to talk about it. From where I sit, my great equalizer is the menstrual cycle. So regardless of what type of diet that a woman chooses to follow, my experience has taught me that the menstrual cycle will tell you if you're on the right track. If you're eating a certain way and you stop ovulating, well, we're going to have to take a look at that. But one of the questions I want to ask you about is sugar. So you mentioned that just in general, a big part of the ketogenic diet, a big part of going low carb is reducing the exposure to simple carbohydrates or just maintaining blood sugar balance or whatever the case is. So maybe share with us why that is the approach that you're talking about. Like, what is wrong with all the sugar consumption?
Well, definitely it's affecting cortisol, right? We increase cortisol, we increase glucose. And I've been monitoring for my next book. I have a continuous glucose monitor on. So Lisa, I'm diverging to answer your question, but I want to share it. So I've been monitoring, and it's very interesting. I was fasting when I was speaking on stage as a keynote speaker at KetoCon this year. And in that state, my blood sugar rose over 150. And so typically it's in the 80s. So just in that fasting state, because of cortisol, my blood sugar rose to the 150s. So that was just eye-opening for me. And I've tested it out since, just in thinking, waking up and hitting the ground running and being stressed out about a certain situation and ruminating about it, my blood sugar goes up so tremendously. And that's fasting. So it's more than about what we eat. And that's where my program really dials that in. But the concept, and I can agree with you that sugar is just pervasive in our diets, in our environment. And we really have to get a control on that, because that does affect our hormone balance. It affects cortisol, it affects insulin, and that's going to affect our reproductive hormones. And so we've got to wean off sugar. Now, cycle it back in, especially those few days before your period, or at night. You can have some higher carbs, healthy carbs at night, but we have to reduce the amount of sugar that we're eating. And we get into the state of intermittent ketosis. We don't have to be ketogenic 24/7, but we get in the state of intermittent ketosis, especially in our early reproductive years, and we want to increase that. We want to increase that insulin sensitivity and then cycle back out with healthy feast days. So I'm big into fasting, keto green 80% of the time and another 10% of the time feasting. So that's my 10-80-10 rule, 10% fasting, 80% keto green, 10% feasting. So that creates a metabolic flexibility, but the principles in my keto green way is definitely cut back the carbs.
For the listeners who don't know, what is ketogenesis?
Getting into ketosis is enabling the body to use fat for fuel, ketones for fuel specifically, over glucose for fuel. So constant eating, snacking, we're going to be continuing to use glucose for fuel. And over the long term, that can create insulin resistance, that can create inflammation and other conditions associated, with detrimental health and metabolic syndrome, et cetera. But getting into ketosis enables us to shift from using glucose to fuel to use ketones for fuel. And so glucose is to gasoline as a fuel as ketones are to jet fuel. So clearly understanding the difference here. And in the perimenopause, menopause, when our bodies, our brains, less able to use glucose because of estrogen and probably progesterone decline, switching to use ketones more frequently is even better. So that makes a huge difference in the quality of our lives and our transitions.
Well,
and been taught wrong. Multi-snacking, all that stuff. No.
I hope that you're enjoying today's episode with Dr. Anna as much as I did while recording it. She's so knowledgeable, and I really appreciate her for being on the show. I just wanted to pop in with a quick message from the show sponsor, Audible. Did you know that you can listen to The Fifth Vital Sign for free with your free trial of Audible? If you've never used Audible before, you can actually head over to fertilityfriday.com/audible and listen to The Fifth Vital Sign for free with your free trial of Audible. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/audible. Now let's jump back into today's episode with Dr. Anna. Well, so basically what I'm, hearing is that our body, we need to fuel our body. So we need to fuel all of our energy needs and everything. And so typically when we're going through our lives and just eating normally, like the normal diet, like the normal North American quote unquote diet, we would primarily be using glucose for fuel. So you have your typical breakfast of oatmeal and you're eating a variety of carbohydrates as well as some fats and proteins. And so then your body's primarily using glucose for fuel, meaning sugar. And so one of the challenges I would say is that ketosis is, most people don't eat that way. So in order to achieve a level of ketosis, you would have to severely restrict your carbohydrate intake and up the fat intake and then maintain your protein intake, because you can't just eat something, like there's a limit to how much protein we can eat. But could you just explain a little bit about it? Because with ketosis, it's something that, like, there's a difference between even eating a lower carbohydrate diet and kind of focusing on that versus a diet that would allow you to use the ketones for fuel. And it requires such a serious restriction of carbohydrates that you may have to limit the quantity of fruit that you eat on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. So to clarify, like when we think about ketogenic, and keto's everywhere right now, which is interesting. And you can be keto dirty or you can be keto green, which is keto clean. And that's kind of like my new mantra. So you think about, we want healthy fats and proteins. So let me just give you an example of like breaking fast the keto green way. Think about smoked salmon with capers, onions, maybe some tomatoes and spinach, and drizzle some olive oil on it. So you've got healthy fat, healthy protein, lots of greens for alkalinizers and hormone balance, and good minerals involved in that. So that will also that's a near 0 gram sugar breakfast. There may be some carbs in the tomato. So a little bit goes a long way. But so you keep that nice and low, your blood sugar is not going to swing up and then swing down, making you hungry in another couple hours for your next meal. And that's where people get it wrong, like oatmeal for breakfast or cereal for breakfast or bagels for breakfast or anything that's higher carb. even fruit smoothies for breakfast is going to bring your sugar up and then bring you right back down. And that's going to make you want to eat again. And so hunger is physiologic. So thinking healthy fats to help with cravings, good quality protein, and lots of greens and fibers to detox, alkalinize, and provide additional minerals and makes that, and fullness certainly is a great way to break fast. And then not eat again for 5 or 6 hours, depending on, what type of eating schedule you're on, or at least 4 hours to allow your blood sugar to drop nice and low.
Well, and question for you. So do you think that it's necessary for women to actually go so far, like to go so low carb that they put themselves in a state of ketosis? Or do you think that, you know what I mean? Like, is it necessary to go that far, or can we kind of just go lower carb? You know what I'm saying? Like, do you think it's necessary to actually go to that level? Or do you think for certain women it might be more appropriate than others? Or how do you feel about that?
I think it's necessary intermittently or periodically to get into ketosis. I think it's and ketosis and with intermittent fasting to further us into a state of autophagy, which is cleansing. Throughout centuries and cultures and religions, fasting has been built in, and for spiritual purposes, but certainly there's the physical benefits of fasting that we're well aware of now as we get more into fasting science and autophagy. So autophagy is like our body's ability to get rid of unhealthy, unproductive, or naughty cells, right? And how do we do that? Autophagy is through the fasting state. And so we have to build in times and periods of intermittent fasting, and that will enable us also to get into ketosis. The more we do this, the more flexibility we will have metabolically to help us achieve these results. And I believe that's very good in any age. And especially if we want to conceive, like doing a detox, my detox programs for my fertility clients included 3 days of protein fasting, essentially. So we would do a keto green shake, essentially, very mild, and bone broth, and just have 3 days of GI rest to ideally help us get into ketosis, get into a state of autophagy, and help our body clean up what needs to be cleaned up.
Well, and on the topic of intermittent fasting, I mean, over the past several years, there are a lot of men in this field who actively promote fasting and intermittent fasting. And there's different definitions of it. So, when you talk about fasting, you can kind of not eat for all day. A lot of influencers or different health, particularly men in the health space, will talk about, okay, just skip breakfast or skip this meal or have 1 meal a day or those types of things. And often when women try to match the kind of male model of intermittent fasting and fasting, they lose their periods or they start having different issues with their menstrual cycles. And the way you talk about intermittent fasting is often, getting your 3 meals a day, but not snacking in between. So did you want to shed some light on, is there a difference between male and female physiology? Is there a difference in the way that fasting works for men versus women?
Yeah, absolutely. And, men have 10 times as much testosterone as women. Men's brain produce 6 times as much estrogen than women. So, those are very interesting phenomena. And so men can they get into ketosis quicker, they lose weight quicker, they have higher metabolisms than we do. So it works differently. For women, I typically have them start out in my book, The Hormone Fix. We talk my 10-day keto green quick start. So we break fast with a keto green shake. After, ideally, you go 13 to 15 hours between dinner the night before, which should be eaten by 7 p.m., to breakfast. So go between 13 to 15 hours, work up to get 15 hours between dinner to breakfast on a regular basis. So that's intermittent fasting. Most of it's done while you're sleeping. And then eat, so for example, if you're starting with a 15, if you worked up to a 15-hour fast, which is typically what I do. So if I finish dinner at 6, then at 9 a.m., I'm breaking fast after my workout with a keto green smoothie. And then, 4 hours or 5 hours later, if I'm having lunch, I might have lunch or I might have an early dinner. So I might be 3 meals a day or 2 meals a day. And then you have a great, green salad with sprouts. Sprouts are powerful alkalinizers and very low carb. So a green salad with sprouts and, an olive oil, lemon juice, garlic dressing. It's one of my favorites. That recipe's in my book too. It's just a Mediterranean recipe with Himalayan sea salt. And a protein of choice. Maybe it's salmon, maybe it's steak, maybe it's chicken, maybe it's a vegetarian protein. So, you can do a combination of things and then have a healthy dinner, which usually say palm size portion of a quality meat, free range, grass fed, wild caught, if we're using meat, and then the 3/4 of the plate in greens. So sauteed beet greens, sauteed vegetables, and drizzling on olive oil or using ghee to get additional healthy fat and season it up because herbs are so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, one of the things that we were talking a little bit about in the pre-chat is that there's a lot of, this is, whenever we talk about dietary things and dietary practices that involve some degree of restriction, I think it's really important just to kind of acknowledge and mention the world that we live in. So there's a lot of pressures for women to maintain very skinny, small, and now very athletic bodies. And so there's a lot of women who are looking for ways to lose weight and to be really thin. And I think that maybe one of the myths about intermittent fasting is that the goal is to eat less food or something, when in order to be healthy, you're concentrating your meals in a certain time period, but you're not eating less food. Like in the day, you're not eating fewer calories. Like you're eating all of the calories, but you're just eating them at a certain time as opposed to eating them all day. Like, so instead of snacking throughout the day and eating like 4 meals or 3 meals and 10 snacks, you're basically adding all of those calories up and eating all of them in a restricted time period. So I'd be interested to hear what you have to say, because I think what I'm getting at is that for women who are somewhere on that kind of disordered eating spectrum, I'm not saying that, all women who are on that spectrum have quote unquote an eating disorder, but for women who are actively restricting their diets, trying to eat less food and doing it so that they can lose weight, I feel like there's certain times when adopting a restrictive diet like this can kind of further that unhealthy eating pattern as opposed to actually doing what it's intended to do, which is to improve hormonal health.
Hormonal health and balance, right? That's critical. And, hepatic health, liver health, all of that is critical for body balance, no matter how old we are. But I definitely hear what you're saying. And the big thing to understand, and this was eye-opening to me, calorie restriction is worse for your body than complete fasting. So when we're consuming 500 calories a day, we're going to have a bigger drop in metabolism than if we're consuming 0. So that's really important under, less than
Can you 100. Just repeat that in another way? Because I feel like that's what you just said is so important.
So important.
Tell us why. So basically, I need to, I feel like I need to do this. So bear with me for a second. But basically what you just said is like dieting, meaning eating less the calories than you need, is worse for your body than eating no calories.
Yes.
So tell us why.
Yeah, because when we're eating no calories, we're getting into autophagy. And according to the research too, we're seeing muscle sparing preventive mechanisms engaged. That's survival mechanisms engaged. When we're eating low, just enough, right, to keep us, maybe it's 500 calories a day, apparently, and depending on what those calories are, but apparently we get into a metabolic stall, decrease in metabolism. So what happens when you go back to eating regularly, the low calorie eaters will gain more weight quicker than the fasters.
And can we I want to say it in a little bit of a different way.
Okay, go for it.
More of a blunt way. So when you're starving yourself, meaning that you're not eating enough food, you're putting your body into a completely different state than when you are actually fasting, because fasting is more of a productive state where your body goes into kind of a different mode.
Right. Right. Well, again, extended starving is never good. Extended low calorie eating is not good. Right. So that's really critical. And I never recommend fasting without doing detox, without nourishing your body and being highly in tune with your body. But again, in the right states and the right conditions, it's amazing. It's amazingly effective and healing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's really important. And that's why I wanted to bring it up, because there's a lot of, especially within the health space, there are a lot of practitioners who have worked with women who are adopting a keto diet or a low carb diet, and they lose their periods and they have a lot of additional hormonal issues. But the issue isn't necessarily that they were eating enough calories on a keto diet and having problems. It's often that they just weren't using the keto diet as a reason to restrict themselves. And therefore, in the times of the day that they're eating, or, especially if they're doing intermittent fasting or fasting, that they're actually not providing their bodies with enough calories, energy, fuel to sustain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I would love just to hear you talk a little bit about how that's different, because I feel like that's kind of a misconception about some of it's just because, for example, when you're looking at menstrual cycle health, first of all women are different. So all women are not going to respond the same way to any particular way of eating. That's why there's all, different ways, different things that we can do. So for some women who are particularly sensitive to glucose and resistant to insulin. For some women, I've seen the charts of some women for whom perhaps they have an issue with insulin resistance. They're somewhere on the PCOS spectrum. When they consume sugars, it really has a negative impact on their cycles. So all women are not the same. And I keep saying that because it's really important. For some women, then when they they're changing their macronutrient ratio. They're consuming more healthy fats, they're consuming enough protein, and then they're consuming carbohydrates, but perhaps not the high glycemic carbohydrates that are going to raise their blood sugar. I've seen that really reverse a lot of menstrual cycle issues for some women. For other women, they might try to restrict their carbohydrate to quite a low level, and they may not do as well, because perhaps for them, in order to achieve that body balance you were talking about, they need to kind of modify that a bit. Could you talk a little bit about the bio-individuality?
Yeah, well, it really depends too on stage of life, what you're dealing with, what are the reasons for the underlying disruption. I think that's really critical to understand too. It's the underlying reasons for why you're feeling this way. Is it stress? Is it trauma? Is it adverse childhood experiences? Is it endocrine disruptors? Is it mold toxicity, liver toxicity? What else is going on? Is it a result of birth control pills? So we have so many factors. In my book, I put questionnaires in there to help you kind of tease out and realize, okay, well, these areas need to be addressed, or I didn't realize these could be hormonal symptoms, or kind of brings to light as well as the solution in stages, right? Say there are 7 aspects of an assessment when I make a medical plan for someone. So there's always the mental, spiritual, there's a nutrition aspect, and then digestion is 3, detoxification is 4, and hormonal balance is 5. And then, of course, sexual health would be 6. And 7 is inflammation in the environment. So all of these things affect us. So we have to look at each of them. This creates a sense of bio-individuality, right? The environment, genetic, kind of the epigenetics that we experience. So also genetics plays a role too. So where is that coming in? Do we methylate well? But regardless, the principles are foundational. And that can help, and always listen and discern what's working for you, what's not working for you. Maybe you need to cycle in or out more frequently than someone else. But when it comes to bio-individuality, we have to look at the many pieces. That's why it's not one pill, one drug fits all, right? That's why we have so much trouble getting results, because there is such bio-individuality. But lo and behold, we as individuals with this amazing body, mind, spirit, energy have a tremendous capacity to heal our body. And finding, using the right resources, natural resources, using natural interventions, creating a lifestyle that works for us in our life, in our relationships, is going to help us restore our health.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as we start bringing our interview to a close, one of the questions that I have for you as well, I mean, you've been sharing with us how you guide your patients and into just a healthier menopause, balancing hormonal health, and how it is impacted essentially by the way that we eat. And we've been talking about intermittent fasting and ketosis and generally lower carb. And so the question basically is, in your experience, how does this approach help to improve hormones? And what are some of for instance, some of the symptoms that your patients have experienced, like declining or that have gone away as they take on this approach?
Yeah, well, regarding symptoms that improve, it's the hot flashes, the weight gain. We're able to achieve or get close to our ideal body weight, the mood swings, the irritability, and mostly it's that joie de vivre. So, for example, I have a client whose name is Kathy, and she's was really struggling with just fatigue at the end of her workday, coming home and had given everything at work, nothing left for the family, basically on the couch and not enjoying her family and her relationships and just really on decline. And so in just a few weeks, she wrote me and she said, Dr. Anna, not only am I more energetic than I've been in over a decade, but I am enjoying my family. And guess what? They're enjoying me too. And I love that because that's the truth, right? Like, oh my gosh, we start creating our own magnetism. We change our energy and becomes more positive. Guess what? Those relationships that we value improve. And that's priceless, right? That's priceless. And not to mention, she had a horse she hadn't ridden for 2 years and was thinking about selling him, a show horse. And she was back up and riding again and started riding again. So things that, bring joy to our life, if we've stopped doing it, we can reclaim those things. And it's amazing how many little things we may be missing in our life and not enjoying fully like we really deserve to be.
Well, and it's kind of sad to think of ourselves as slaves to our hormones. But when you were giving that example, I couldn't help but think of what you were talking about earlier with regards to the connection between cortisol and oxytocin, and how when the cortisol is really high, it's pushing down your progesterone and estrogen, especially during that kind of perimenopausal, the years as we approach menopause, and how it can kind of rob us of some of that joy. And just by improving overall your body's ability to produce and maintain optimal hormone levels, you can actually inadvertently affect your level of happiness. Like that, I felt like that's what I took from your example.
Absolutely. Yes. That's what's so profound.
Yeah, it's so interesting because then you don't want to think of yourself as like a slave to your hormones, but then we're not. But at the same time, our hormones affect our day-to-day lives, our emotions, our experience of the world. And so I really do appreciate that example.
Oh, very welcome. And there's so many more like that, thinking of a client who was 43 years old and, adopting the Keto Green Way. She was in my Magic Menopause program. And she goes, I went to the gas station. I'm going to this gas station all the time. And the guy's like, oh my God, like, I didn't recognize you. You look 18. And she's like, what? And he goes, you just look so healthy. And it was fascinating for her to hear that. And what a compliment to say that, for her was that you look healthy. And here she is 43. And he's like, you look 18. How that energy, how magnetizing that is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground today. Thank you so much for being here. We've really gone through different stages of life, the hormone connection, the connection between diet and our hormone production, cortisol, and also touched on some really important topics that I haven't addressed as much on the podcast as I'd like to. So particularly ketosis and keto diets, as well as intermittent fasting, and just, a lot of the different topics that we talked about. So if the listener could take away one thing from our interview today, what would you want it to be?
I want listeners to practice, I want to say immediately the Keto Green Way, because it starts with appreciation and incorporating joy into your life. And that really empowers our most amazing hormone and powerful hormone, oxytocin. And the more oxytocin we can bring into our life, the better our lives are, and the better we're able to do other things that we set forth to do. So yeah, just definitely never lose hope, and know that you are so worth investing in yourself.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Anna, thank you so much for being here today. It was really nice to have an opportunity to chat with you and to really dig into the different ways we can support our hormone health. Where can the listeners go to learn more about you, what you do, to grab a copy of your book, the Hormone Fix, Burn Fat Naturally, Boost Energy, Sleep Better, and Stop Hot Flashes, the Keto Green Way? Just share with us where we can find more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So dranna.com. So just think DRANNA.com, dranna.com. And if you do dranna.com/book, there'll be more information and plus book bonuses that I've included there for your audience. So dranna.com/book. And I appreciate hearing from you.
Well, thank you so much again. It was a real treat to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/280. I hope that you enjoyed today's podcast episode with Dr. Anna. I really appreciated our conversation, and I liked all of the different places that we ended up. It really touched me, her story about how stress deeply impacted her cycle, and how although she was diagnosed essentially with early menopause, it wasn't the end of her story. I think it's really easy to get caught up in numbers, often in my Facebook group. And, when I'm having conversations with women, especially when you've been struggling with fertility challenges, you're going to doctors, you're getting tests, and you're getting results back with all of these numbers. So you have your FSH number, you have your LH number, you have your estrogen levels, you have your AMH number, you have all of these numbers. The challenge with lab results is that those numbers are part of this whole vital sign concept that we talk about. When you're getting a number back, if your FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, is too high, if your AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone levels, are too low, it's a different way of looking at those vital signs. And it's important to know that those numbers on a lab are not a life sentence. And depending on the situation, they can be changed. And often when I'm working with clients and we're working on improving hormonal health, and we're looking at the menstrual cycle, and we're looking at all the things that we can do to optimize hormonal health, often my clients are surprised to find that those numbers improve. And it's not that we were specifically targeting our target for the AMH is this. It's not like this is not how, this is not the way that we go about things. It's not that goal oriented, that masculine type of energy. But when you're improving the overall health, when you're looking at the cycle, when you're looking at the specific factors that can negatively impact hormonal production, and really working towards those over a period of time, you may find that those numbers do improve. For example, follicle stimulating hormone is the hormone that is released by your pituitary to stimulate the growth of your ovarian follicles as you approach ovulation. When your FSH number is really high, it means that your ovaries are, for whatever reason, resistant. So, the pituitary is trying to have a conversation to say, hey guys, it's time to start, making some eggs. And for whatever reason, your ovaries are not really listening. It's not, our bodies are incredible. And when your ovaries are not responding, there's typically a reason for that. So it's often that scenario of it's not the best time to reproduce. Perhaps it's a time of high stress. Perhaps there's inflammation in the body. Perhaps, there's lots of different reasons why your ovaries may be resisting what's happening. And of course, one of those may be age, but often that's not the only explanation. And I just wanted to share this because like I mentioned, Dr. Anna's story really touched me. She had experienced a horribly traumatic loss, and her period stopped at that moment. That's when ovulation stopped happening, and it didn't happen again for quite a few years afterwards. Her doctors were looking at that as menopause, but from the perspective of your menstrual cycle is a vital sign and it responds to what happens in your body. It's just a different way of looking at the exact same thing. Really, this was a bodily response to a profound traumatic stress. And in Dr. Anna's case, the medical diagnosis, the medical way of looking at it, wasn't actually the final answer. And there was more to the story than that. And so I just want to leave you with that thought that when you're getting lab results and you're getting these numbers, they're not necessarily kind of like a death sentence in that sense. They can be presenting a picture in time. The numbers can change. And an excellent example of that is what happens when you come off of birth control. If you were to come right off of birth control and have your AMH levels tested and your FSH and your estrogen and your progesterone, if you were to have those levels tested, they would probably look similar to that of a woman nearing menopause. When you look at the research studies that are done, women who come off birth control, their ovarian reserve parameters, those numbers are quite low immediately after you come off of birth control. And once your body has had an opportunity to rebound and really start to go through that transitional period where your ovaries resume normal function, you start producing your hormones again, the connection and conversation between your pituitary, ovaries, and hypothalamus starts happening again, what happens is those numbers improve. And so if you were to get those tests done immediately post pill and make decisions and assumptions about what that means for your overall health in the long term, you really would be mistaken to do that, because it's really giving you a snapshot of what's happening in your body at one particular time. And so in a similar way, so that the pill can have an effect on these numbers, in a similar way, if you're going through a really stressful time, or if there's something happening in your life, in your body, in your diet, or something that's going on, it can also have an impact. So those numbers aren't necessarily just stagnant. They don't just sit there, and they don't necessarily equal your age, so to say. So I just wanted to share that with you, because that's kind of the purpose of this. And I often see women struggling with these numbers, because in many cases you're doing these tests, you're getting these numbers, and the doctor's basically saying, well, they're too low and there's really nothing you can do, and the only option is IVF. And so for some women, that might be an acceptable answer. And for other women, there's a little voice inside saying, is IVF the only way? Is that really the only thing that I can do? It depends on the situation, but in cases like that, it's really important to seek support, and consider seeking support from a functional practitioner in addition to your doctor, seeking support from someone like myself who specializes in the menstrual cycle and improving hormonal health in a natural way, in addition to the support that you're getting from your medical professionals. And so with that said, I want to thank you for spending some time with me today, for tuning into today's podcast. We will be talking about hormonal health. We'll be talking about keto and the different dietary options in the Fertility Friday Facebook community. If you are not already in there, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/community to join us in there. And so with that, I will let you go enjoy the rest of your week, weekend, whenever you're listening to the podcast episode. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.